Let me get started and welcome each of you here to your City Hall. If you're not familiar, this was the old council chambers, now for educational purposes and meetings, etc. And welcome to your City Hall. I am John Ditzler, Mayor of the City of Noblesville, and we're very pleased to have so many people here. Obviously, we did not anticipate this many people, so we do appreciate you jockeying around as we setting up additional seating. But again, welcome. This is an exciting project, and we just want you to see it and become familiar with it. Noblesville, obviously, we all love Noblesville, but our downtown is obviously the heart of the city of Noblesville, and we're very blessed to have a very vital downtown. And people that are concerned about it wanted to do something now as opposed to wait till we had problems or whatever. We're riding a great wave. It's very vibrant. But we don't want to improve downtown after, in fact, it's too late. And so that's the reason that this project was undertaken, and I think you'll be very, very excited about it. With us tonight, we have two council people, Mary Sue Rowland in the back, former mayor, and Terry Busby is also with us. And, of course, they're the ones that also, along with myself, have the vision for downtown and, frankly, provide the funds so we can pay for the study. But we all care at City Hall about our downtown. And with us tonight, and the presenter, if you will, is our Economic Development Director, Chris Ham. He is kind of taken this project as well as the corporate campus and got all the players together. We had a lot of public input, which he has the knowledge of, and we'll explain it to you in the presentation. But again, we really value our downtown. We want to make Noblesville better every day, and I think this project, as you'll see, is very exciting as to what the future of the city of Noblesville will look like in downtown Noblesville. So without further ado, let me introduce our Director of Economic Development, Chris Ham. Thank you.
You're supposed to wait till after the presentation to determine whether you're going to clap or not. But thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the wonderful introduction. This truly is a plan for the city of Noblesville. It's a downtown strategic redevelopment plan, but so many people have participated in this process in developing this plan. So many individuals have given their time during this process that it's not my plan. It's not the council or the mayor's plan. It truly is a plan for the city of Noblesville, and I hope that you'll all find that as we go through the presentation tonight. Before we get started, I would like to thank some people. There were a lot of folks who gave a great deal of their time serving on the steering committee for this group. Four of them are sitting in the room right now, and I'd like to introduce them. Camberly Bebo, Joe Arrowwood, John Elliott, and Mary Sue Rowland. And if I'm missing somebody in the room, let me know. These four people, along with Steve Schwartz, Sharon McMahon, Ben Bontrager, and am I missing somebody? Now Ben left the room. John, well, I mentioned John. Gave countless hours of their personal time serving on a steering committee to weed through this information over the past 18 months and come together with what I think is an outstanding plan for downtown Noblesville. And I just want to personally thank them. It was an honor to have been able to serve with them during this process and to get to know them better during this. And I think you'll find that their hard work has paid off in an outstanding plan. We've also had countless numbers of citizens who've taken time out of their evenings to come to meetings, to come to focus groups, to come to a series of interview processes that we'd had. And I'd like to thank the citizens of the community for their participation in this process. We could not have created this plan without them, and it's through their hard work that we've gotten to where we are today. With that, I'd like to start going through some of the components of the plan itself. When we started this process, we knew that we wanted to create a bold new vision for downtown Noblesville. We wanted to make downtown Noblesville an area that served 40,000 people in the same way it was built and designed to serve 4,000 people. Noblesville is the fastest growing community in the state of Indiana, among the 5 fastest growing communities in the nation of our size. We have tremendous growth pressures in our community, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. One of the advantages is, and I can remember a time, I've lived in this community my entire life, I can remember a time when downtown Noblesville wasn't nearly as vibrant and active as it is today. growth, in my mind, has had a good opportunity for downtown Noblesville and provided the opportunity for businesses and entrepreneurs to thrive within our community. But we've got to balance those issues and concerns and manage those issues. And the best way to manage and protect the heart of our community, and downtown Noblesville, make no bones about it, is the heart of this community. To preserve that, we need a plan in place that helps drive that project forward. So as we started, we began to define what that looks like. What is downtown? And the first question we asked anybody who participated was, what is downtown Noblesville? Draw on a map and define the geography of downtown Noblesville. Over 200 people answered that question and took the time to draw a map. And we got a variety of circles that were drawn. Some right around the courthouse square, some within the central business district, some that went as far north as Field Drive and as far south as Carbon Street. But not one person thought that the west side of White River played any part in their perceived definition of downtown Noblesville. I thought that was pretty telling, because when I thought about it, the west side of the river wasn't part of downtown Noblesville to me either. But it is so much a potential for downtown Noblesville and a tremendous opportunity for us. But as this purpose, and I won't read this for you, but clearly this plan was derived to have a set of principles in place that put an action plan together that had a bold vision for downtown Noblesville, but a basis in market reality. We didn't want to create this crystal palace that could never be built, that private capital investors would never come and build in our community, and that, quite frankly, we couldn't convince the citizens to put the public capital infrastructure in to do. So everything you'll see here has a strong basis in market-driven reality. I'll qualify it by saying, however, that nothing in this plan is written into stone. This is a bold vision set to create a set of guidelines for us to move forward in the future. You're going to see some renderings towards the end of the plan that show some buildings that look drastically different than what they might look like today. I'm not going to show up at your doorstep tomorrow with a check to condemn your property. Nobody from the city is going to be doing that. Nobody's going to be coming to you and telling you, you need to do this, and this is the only thing that can happen with your piece. But the purpose is to begin to define a vision and show what some of the principles that we're talking about might look like in real-life applications. When we were discussing this component, we began to understand that we had these community desires, wants, and needs that we talked and we gathered during the interview process and the public information process. We began to understand the physical conditions and constraints of downtown Noblesville, and certainly this component of market conditions that begin to talk about vision and development opportunities and reality, and ultimately, we think, come together in a very strong strategic plan that talks about physical plans, that talks about current conditions, and that envisions what future opportunities might be. As I stated, we went through a series of public input processes. The steering committee reached out to their organizations and the Preservation Alliance, the Chamber, Noblesville Main Street, City Council, the City Administration, and tried to engage those distinctive stakeholder groups in this process directly. We had a series of focus groups and open houses that sought to reach out beyond those constituency groups and get into the neighborhoods and talk to people who were directly affected by this plan, property owners, business owners, residential neighbors of the communities around this area to be affected. And our attempt was to touch as many people as we can at least once, and to touch as many people as we could multiple times to get their input throughout this process. We talked about this perception of downtown and the lack of the west side of the river. We also began to understand that a lot of people perceived that when you defined downtown, it went beyond just the central business district, but it included, the more traditional residential grid of old Noblesville. And through that process, we came to 7 general strategies and conclusions, which we'll talk about in more detail. The first being that there needs to be an organized and designed downtown leadership. The second is that we need to use the river as an asset for our community and not see it as the detriment that it tends to be seen as to this point and the constraint. We've defined some particular strategic redevelopment areas, which we'll talk about in greater detail, and there are 3 of them. Some components of helping to reinforce the central business district. This isn't a non-residential solution. I don't want anybody in the room to believe this is all about how can we make the businesses around the square be more successful. That is a strong component of this plan, but there's much more to it than just that. There are these strategic opportunities for commercial and residential infill in areas. And keep in mind, nowhere in this plan are you going to see the bulldozer approach. The intent is not to wipe clean a city block and start over from scratch. There are communities around the country, there are communities much closer to us who have opted to take the scrape it off and start over from scratch approach. And I'll tell you that's easier and it's cheaper, but it is not better. This is better. We've got an opportunity to find particular areas that need help. Buildings that don't make sense within the context that they're within today. One-story buildings surrounded by three-story buildings. Residential properties surrounded by commercial properties. And commercial properties surrounded by residential properties. We have an opportunity to think, and the word that had come up during this process was think surgically, using a scalpel and not a knife. This is about finding those strategic opportunities for redevelopment. We'll talk about those a little bit further. Very important component of this plan is the residential neighborhood connectivity. How can we enhance that connectivity between the so important demographic of residents who live in Old Noblesville and beyond, and bring them in and make them a stronger component of the downtown or non-residential solution in Noblesville. And then also, and finally, and by no means least importantly, the concept of local and regional connectivity. How can we make downtown Noblesville a hub beyond just Noblesville? How can we get people from the Monon Trail to ride their bike into downtown Noblesville and spend the day and go to Alexander's, get an ice cream cone, and play at Forest Park? Throughout this process, we began to, and I'll offer that on these boards up here, which will be available after the presentation, you'll see this in some greater level of detail. And we're in the process of making copies of the actual draft written plan itself. We did not anticipate a turnout this strong tonight. Thank you all for coming out and spending some of your evening with us tonight. For those of you who don't get a written hard copy of the plan tonight, I'll offer that it should be on our website within the next 24 hours. And if you'd like to stop into our office later this week, we'll have copies at the front desk for folks to pick up. You can begin to see some of these things that we've talked about, this concept, and I'm not sure I like the word Newtown, but this concept of the historic downtown core and this opportunity to move away from this more traditional suburban residential development into something that's more attuned to what's happening in the existing business core, focusing on the neighborhood components and the connectivity of those pieces, identifying these strategic redevelopment areas, which we'll talk about in greater detail, understanding that green space is a major component of this plan, not only the existing and tremendous asset we have in Forest Park, but opportunities that you begin to see in some of these green space areas on the southwest part of Noblesville, and then obviously these more traditional mixed-use corridors than 8th Street and 10th Street, the historic corridor in Connor Street, and then this more traditional suburban type of development that's occurred out on State Road 37. When they began putting pen to paper and rendering this component, this is kind of the bird's eye view that they'd came up with. Here's the courthouse, this tremendous icon of the center of downtown Noblesville, and the buildings that surround it. And you'll begin to see in orange some of these potential redevelopment opportunities, which we'll talk about in greater detail. This very important riverfront component that becomes part of this component as well, and the recreational opportunities that exist within Forest Park and other places. From a timeline perspective, we knew that it was very important to hit the ground running. My hope is that I didn't have the opportunity to waste 8 people's time over the past 18 months. We want to put a plan in place that is not only visionary but also implementable, if that's a word. We want to be able to have something that we can hit the ground running from day one and begin making this plan a reality, because it's so important for the future of our community. So we front-loaded a lot of the work. It's probably appropriate for me at this point to at least introduce the staff from the Economic Development Department who are here. Ben Bontrager, who you might have seen earlier, I believe he may have stepped out to go look at the copies. Amy Shanklin, also not in the room. I should have done this earlier. Amy Shanklin not in the room now, but probably most importantly, Christy Myers, who's leaning up against the table today, is the new Assistant Director for Downtown and Existing Business Relations. Christy is the one who's going to be driving this plan home for us. She comes to us with some experience in Sarasota, Florida, and with historic groups in Indianapolis. She's got an energy about her that's contagious, and I think that's most important in driving this forward. because this is all about energy. It's all about maintaining momentum, and Christy's going to do a tremendous job for the city in helping to drive this plan home. But you'll see she's got a lot of work to do very early on in this process. You knew that when you hired on, though. So we're excited about some of these things. And without going into a lot of detail about this component, because you'll see this on some of the boards and some of the other things. I mean, it talks about, the leadership component and the river walk and the gateway pieces, which we'll talk about in more detail. But the purpose of this is to understand that there's a significant amount of work in the first 5 years of this plan. We don't intend for this to be one of those plans that so treacherously sits on a shelf and gathers dust for a period of time. This is something we want to start implementing today. The first component of that plan is the component of downtown leadership, and I'm proud to say we've got our first piece of that implemented in hiring Christy to help bring this process home. But it's more than just having the point person. It's about teamwork. It's about leadership from multiple organizations and bringing the right stakeholders to the table and having the right conversations. And implementation is such a key component of this, because this plan means nothing if it never gets implemented and put into the ground. And I've been involved in plenty of planning studies in the 11 years that I've had the pleasure of serving with the city of Noblesville. And most of the plans that I've been involved with, the first thing we talk about is how we're going to get it done. How we're going to take this thing from being paper to reality. Because the implementation part is the hardest part of any planning process. It's also the most important. Our consultants development concepts, and it's worth thanking them for their hard work during this process too. DCI did a tremendous job in gathering information and bringing new ideas to the table and synthesizing this in the final report itself. I don't want you to read this. I don't want you to pay any attention to this other than the fact you have to understand that this is a team effort. I couldn't do this on my own. Christy couldn't do this on her own. The mayor or the council couldn't do this on their own. No not-for-profit organization in the city can drive this process home. This requires the most organized teamwork that this city has ever seen to bring this process home. And I'm proud to say that we're there. We have a tremendous team in place that's prepared to drive this process home. For the first time, we've got organizations who've been at each other's throats for years, sitting across the table, coming together with a common purpose to drive this plan forward. And I'm proud. If nothing else, I'm proud of that we've got diverse groups who've come together with the intent of doing good for this community and bringing this community a plan and a process that's going to be tremendous for generations to come. But it doesn't stop at teamwork. Even the best team and the greatest coach can't go if they don't have the players and the pieces in place to make it happen. And the first part of that is the component of the riverfront. And thinking about that riverfront is a tremendous asset. I'm proud to be able to say that I was at a meeting earlier this year where Commissioner Dillinger had indicated that the riverfront project is on way for this summer. First phase of that process is start construction. That's a critical component of this plan, thinking about how we can connect the two sides of White River for the first time. They've been so apart for so long that this riverfront can be the zipper that finally brings the west and the east sides of White River together, providing redevelopment opportunities. But it's more than just geographical and connectivity. There's opportunities about thinking about floodplain management within the White River, and what can we do as a community to begin thinking about the floodplain of White River being kept within the banks of the river itself. These aren't easy things. These aren't simple things. These aren't things that are going to happen overnight. They represent a high level of thinking in this process. But if we can deliver this plan, the outcome will be tremendous. But thinking about the river and managing the floodplain in a way that provides more opportunities for development along that river. Expanding the Riverwalk beyond what even the current plans are for it. Finding these opportunities for public-private partnerships and regional connectivity and recreation, because it's such a component of this plan. And this plan was driven on the basis that downtown Noblesville is a place where you should be able to live, work, play, and shop. And that's important to think about for a minute. We talk a lot about what we want Noblesville to be. What do we think of ourselves? Well, if we think of ourselves as being a community where we want a whole life community, a place where I can raise my family, my kids can go to school, my kids can graduate, go to college, hopefully go to college someday in Noblesville. Graduate from college and find a job at home where they can start their family. And I can retire to see my grandkids, all within the confines of the city of Noblesville. Live, work, play, and shop here, and never have to leave unless you want to. We are closer to that in Noblesville than we have ever been before. but we've got a lot of work to do that. And downtown Noblesville is the perfect example of how we need to make that happen, because within itself, that represents the heart of our community and how we can make that happen within downtown Noblesville. It's about leveraging amenities. Again, beginning to see the river as an amenity rather than a constraint to development. Using that river as an opportunity to bridge the historic part of Noblesville to this new, and this is a 12-story hotel. I'm not telling you there's ever going to be a 12-story hotel in downtown Noblesville. In fact, I have my serious doubts there ever would be. But when we went through this process, we told the consultants and we told everybody involved, aim high. We may not be able to get where we want to get to, but we certainly don't want to sell ourselves short. So they put a 12-story hotel in Noblesville that's bridged with a habit trail walking across to Riverview Hospital and providing opportunities for folks to come out of town and stay with their loved ones when they're unfortunately getting service. I know it's unfortunately, when they're getting great services at Riverview Hospital. Unfortunately, they're there. Fortunately, they're at Riverview Hospital. But thinking about that, itchy trigger finger, thinking about how that can tie into that tremendous amenity and opportunity there, and then the riverfront itself. We talk about these strategic redevelopment areas, or these purple blobs, and there are 3 of them, and there's no mistaking why they are where they are. These are the gateways to the heart of Noblesville. When you're driving north on 10th Street, or westward on Connor Street, or eastward off of 3238, your image of Noblesville is set well before you get into downtown. You've already created an essence of what your expectation is of downtown Noblesville before you ever get there, based on these corridors. So we need to think very specifically about what we do in these corridors, and all 3 of them are ripe for redevelopment opportunities. The South 10th Street and 8th Street corridors have been traditional, industrial, mixed-use areas with smatterings of residential, but there's opportunities to begin thinking about what that will look like 25 years from now. The west side of White River has been an area that served this community for generations and decades. I shop at the Kroger over there, but is the Kroger the highest and best use of that property? I'm not saying that I'm going tomorrow to go buy the Kroger either, but I'm saying that Kroger has served this community well, and maybe it continues to serve this community for 20 more years. But let's think about from the fabric of what the highest and best use of that ground is, and what impact that might have on available properties as well as existing properties. And then obviously, and the one that was least familiar to me, I've lived here my entire life, but this has always been what it's been. This gateway on State Road 37, and I've always just kind of assumed it was going to be that way forever, because it's always, I used to go roller skating at the Rainbow Roller Rink, and I remember what it was out there, but, the Hardee's has been there as long as I can remember. The reality is there's an opportunity to begin thinking about that gateway and defining a statement at these critical gateways as to what to expect when you get into the central business district, setting an expectation for what happens within that area. The west side of the river, obviously you've got floodplain issues, continual expanding of tremendous health services in our community, traditional commercial strip centers, the old 3D development, Western Plaza and the old 3D development project, and a mix and smattering of residential uses in Monterey Village and some other pieces. The south side, again, has been a mix of hodgepodge of industrial uses and residential neighborhoods with a smattering of retail here and there. And the east side piece, again, has this historic flavor on the Connor Street and Logan Street corridors, and then this more traditional suburban 60s type of commercial development along State Road 37. But when we talk about this concept of highest and best use, this is planning jargon. It means something different to everybody. To me, highest and best use thinks about what do we want in that area 25 years from now? What do I want my kids to see in that area when they're old enough to decide whether they want to live in Noblesville or not? Thinking about, ground being constrained, because there's a limited amount of opportunity to develop ground, but thinking about bringing that ground up multiple stories and thinking about creating opportunities for first floor retail and second and third floor living spaces, strategic parking garages, which we'll talk about in a minute. But finding the land use mix in this area that makes the most sense to drive the vision that you've created forward. Very important component of this plan is reinforcing the central business district, not ignoring the fact that we have good people, strong entrepreneurs who are trying to make ends meet in downtown Noblesville. Some of them doing tremendously well, some of them struggling as entrepreneurs sometimes do. But what can we do as a city? What can we do as a community? What can we do as stakeholder organizations to help them be successful? Economic development in the city of Noblesville operates under the mantra of we want to help business do business in Noblesville. We want to create jobs. We want to create assessed valuation, because job creation and assessed valuation begins to help us achieve the vision of being a whole life community. How can we bring those same tools and resources to the table to help the businesses in downtown Noblesville be successful? What mechanisms are there through tax abatement and incentive programs, through programming for marketing, business plan development, cooperative business hours, parking solutions, infrastructure improvements as the city of Noblesville can make? This list goes on and on and on. We've talked about facade improvements, and we're going to deliver a facade enhancement program in downtown Noblesville. We used to have one. Main Street, I believe, used to run it in cooperation with the Preservation Alliance. We're going to bring that program back, not only to help the facades of the building look better, but to think about how we can help people reactivate the second and third floors of downtown businesses that have sat empty for so long. Streetscape improvements, landscaping improvements, cleanup, maintenance, as well as programming items. This is the put up or shut up component from the city of Noblesville. This is the city of Noblesville putting its money where its mouth is and going out and trying to help and put public capital to work to drive private capital investment in downtown Noblesville and to help those people who are tremendous entrepreneurs and doing things in our community to be more successful in downtown Noblesville. One of the components, and again, I qualify these as saying there is no plan in place tomorrow to get paintbrushes and things out to make these things a reality. But corner of 8th and Logan, as sits today, artist rendering of what that might look like if we try to activate a nightlife component in downtown Noblesville. When we went through this process, we talked to a lot of people, and the one thing that always came back to is, what do you do in the evening in downtown Noblesville? We are blessed to have some of the greatest restaurants in central Indiana in downtown Noblesville. Look at me, I'm a product of it. Since our offices have moved back down here, I've been patronizing a lot to the downtown restaurants, and I think proof positive of the fact that the suit's a little tighter today than it was maybe 4 or 5 months ago. But the truth is, how can we bring that nightlife component? Because there's great places to eat, but once you have dinner in Noblesville, what do you do? Right now, you get the opportunity to go down and leave, although there are some musical events at the Livery and that building and some opportunities, but really there's no nightlife. There's no dinner theater in downtown Noblesville. There's no comedy club in downtown Noblesville. There's nothing that really activates the nightlife of downtown Noblesville. The Allstate building, first floor office use, which market analysts will tell you in downtown Noblesville, no offense to some of the guys who have first floor office space in the building, shouldn't have first floor office space in downtown Noblesville. Downtown Noblesville's first floor should be walkable retail places with vegetable stands and carts sitting out in front, flowers, window shopping. It should activate a pedestrian traffic within downtown Noblesville, and use the second and third floors of those buildings for offices in downtown Noblesville, because we need a good mix of office and retail uses. We have a good mix in Noblesville today, but if we want to move to the next level, we've got to think about how we can use those first floors maybe in a different way than we're using them today. The fifth component is this concept of commercial and residential infill. This is the surgical infill component. Finding those underutilized and non-contributing structures. And anytime you use words like that, everybody's like, ooh, okay, is my house in it? You're going to see some plans that don't intend to draw specific lines on a map. But we're trying to find those vacant lots, those unutilized upper floors, those structures that could be more than what they are today, and begin thinking about how we can use those to drive additional square footage in downtown Noblesville without necessarily expanding the physical footprint of downtown Noblesville itself. This map's identified, and it's hard to read, so I'll try to point to some of these things a little bit more specifically. There are 4 things identified on this plan. The blue areas, which is this ring of surface parking that exists around the outside of the central business district in downtown Noblesville. This is what happens in downtowns all over the country. I mean, this is the traditional downtown expansion process. When you need parking, You take a building down, you put in surface parking, because surface parking is easier than the alternative, which we'll talk about in a minute. We've got some vacant land opportunities. A lot of these are inside a floodplain. This piece not so vacant anymore, and Ace Hardware's under construction on it. But certainly some balance of this piece and some of this area in the floodplain, highly underutilized pieces of ground. Additional floodplain properties, within the watershed of the White River itself, providing opportunities for new development. And then these gray buildings, which you may not see so well, are the one-story buildings within a stone's throw of the courthouse itself. And you got to ask yourself, why is there a one-story building on the courthouse square? And there are a lot of different answers to that question. Some of them are perfectly valid. Building falls down. Person who owns it decides it's easier to build a one-story building than a three-story building in its place. Noblesville's never had an ordinance in place that prohibited anything other than that happening, so do the easy thing, because the easy thing's easy. Now we talk about this parking ring again, and you begin to see these properties. And you all know where these lots are. You may not be able to find parking spaces in them if you want to, but you know where the parking spaces are, and you can see them in driving through downtown Noblesville. And when you get those, when you add those parking pieces in, again going back to this, with some of those one-story buildings, you've been thinking about the CDB or CBD infrastructure and the selective infill projects and what some of those might look like. You begin identifying properties. And again, these are not buildings that anybody's going to be knocking on anybody's door tomorrow looking to buy these pieces of property, but they're designed to encourage us to think about what happens to those in the long run. You begin seeing some potential development opportunities. And I'm going to focus on some of these. You'll begin to see, and you probably can't read from where you are, but there's mixed-use solutions, office solutions, multifamily solutions in this. And during this process, they looked at a number of scenarios about what is the highest and best use for downtown Noblesville. And the solution was, there is no magic answer to that question, other than the fact we know it's a mixed-use solution. This isn't a residential solution exclusively. This isn't a commercial solution exclusively. It's not a parking solution exclusively. But all three of those things are a component of the ultimate solution. We have to find the right mix for this. The important thing, as I stated before, got ahead of myself, is that it's a mixed use. It's about services, it's about parking, it's about residential, and most importantly, it's about marrying them in a way that it's walkable and sustainable. Because that's what makes downtowns work. They're walkable and they're sustainable. Example of this is the auto parts store that sits here and the hearing aid place. I think it's the hearing aid place that's next to it now. Began thinking about what that would look like if it was a 2-story, 3-story condo project sitting on that corner, beginning to stretch condos down the 10th Street corridor, expanding the opportunities for downtown, but being very sensitive to the fact that you're getting into residential areas and you have to transition between commercial and residential uses to keep the integrity of those existing residential neighborhoods. Thinking about the vacant lot, the parking lot across the street from the public safety building. I began thinking about a first-floor retail, second-floor office building that's sensitive to the view of the courthouse square. These aren't about making them as tall as they can be. It's about building mass while being sensitive to neighborhoods and the context in which the mass is constructed. Classic example of the one-story building in downtown Noblesville, and beginning to think about what that might look like if it were backfilled with a 2-story building, and they've envisioned a theater that goes in here. I don't know that a theater makes the most sense for that property, but you give an artist a pen and a piece of paper and carte blanche to draw it, and you never know what you're going to come up with. But I think they did a good job in kind of representing what that looks like from a massing perspective. The Uptown Cafe and that streetscape and this component, focus on that component of the plan. This was a building that I understand fell down. There was kind of a third piece of that building that fell down and got backfilled with the one-story building. What if that was replaced with something that held the integrity of that street line, or that I won't say skyline, but the streetscape component of that in a more traditional way. Number 6 is the concept of residential neighborhoods and the importance of being able to connect those directly into what it is that we're talking about. And it's more than just helping the residents walk or ride their bike to downtown to get an ice cream cone or go to dinner. It's about thinking about how we can promote neighborhood organizations. I live in a subdivision. I grew up in Old Town Noblesville. My parents still live in the same house I was brought home from Riverview Hospital to. I love Old Town. I'm a product of Old Town. graduate of North Elementary. So I love being able to when I was able to ride my bike, I don't know if I could get on a bike anymore, but ride my bike to downtown Noblesville and go to Bear's Candy Shop and get candy when it was still open, before it is what it is today. But begin thinking about how these neighborhoods organize, and they're beginning to organize on their own. This is a very organic process, but north side neighborhoods, the southwest neighborhoods are beginning to organize on their own. And the city and this planning process should help encourage their organization, providing voices for these neighborhoods in a stronger fashion. I believe in the public process. I believe in providing opportunities for citizen input. I believe everybody should have a voice. It's easier when people organize themselves collectively and have one voice speaking on their behalf. It's amazing what difference that makes in the process when people can come together with single purpose and intent and get things done, rather than 100 voices speaking out and crying the same thing. So I think organizing neighborhoods, if for nothing else, to have a hog roast or a street party or something to make neighborhood connectivity amongst themselves. And so many of the things that happen in suburban, traditional neighborhoods that haven't happened or don't happen in the neighborhoods in downtown can happen. But what we can do is to help to facilitate that and provide those people a stronger voice in city government, a stronger voice in their representation, and getting the issues and concerns that they have addressed in a more timely fashion. Creating a concept of a liaison, a person who works with those neighborhood groups. Never been done in Noblesville. City of Indianapolis has multiple neighborhood liaisons. Their only job is to reach out to these groups and make sure that they're getting what they need to do. But thinking about how we can tie, representation to these groups more strongly. Helping in developing these neighborhood improvement plans. And that's not just historic neighborhoods. I think historic neighborhoods are important. I think that the planning processes affiliated with those are very important. This goes beyond that. It's beyond just, making sure that a historic structure gets replaced with another historic structure. It's important, but this is about making sure neighbors know neighbors, and that neighbors are represented in the issues and concerns that are important to them. Talking about trails and riverfronts and ways of connecting these neighborhoods so that they're not just subdivisions within Noblesville, but they're neighborhoods within the context of Noblesville. I think it's important. I had a friend of mine when I was in college from Noblesville. We were at a deal right after we got down there, and somebody asked him, "Where did you live?" And he goes, "Well, I live in Indianapolis." I go, "No, you don't. You live in Noblesville." Well, it's just easier to say I live in Indianapolis because people know where Indianapolis is. I'm like, well, I live in Noblesville. I don't live in Indianapolis. Noblesville's 20 minutes north of Indianapolis, and if you want a map, I'll get one and show you exactly where it is. People need to identify themselves in the fact that they live in Noblesville. They don't live in Whitcomb Ridge or South Harbor or Old Town. We're residents of the same community. We all have many of the same concerns. We have different concerns. Don't get me wrong. Everybody has their own individual concerns, but so many of the concerns are key to all of us that it's important that we understand in this process that the concerns of the residents of downtown are no different or less important than the residents of people who live in subdivisions who have organized homeowners associations who have a stronger voice in being able to come in and represent 300 or 400 homes when they come in. And then finally, this component of trails connecting those neighborhoods together. The white elephant during this whole process, and one of the things that actually spurred this conversation on was, what do we do with the Connor Street corridor? And I was in those rooms during those conversations, and nobody really wanted to exactly talk about it, and we all wanted to push it off to the last thing because it was the hardest thing to do. But the committee has decided, and the recommendation of the plan is that the Connor Street corridor exists as is, as sits. It's a mixed-use piece. Residential stays residential, commercial stays commercial. Commercial doesn't stretch into residential, and quite honestly, I don't expect residential to necessarily creep into commercial. But it's important that the integrity of that corridor be maintained because that's such a critical component of this community. But the most important thing is, as sits, no change. And then finally, this big red circle, which it could be bigger and redder, honestly. Finding ways to bridge the west side to the east side through pedestrian bridges, more so than we've even done. Making sure that neighborhoods to the north and neighborhoods to the south understand and have mutual concerns and are addressed and connect into this very central component of our community. Vacant lot next to what used to be the auto repair place. I think it's now a towing company today, and begin thinking about that lot, extending a streetscape, condos or townhomes right up on the road. creating an urbanized feel to that piece, bridging that downtown and back. And I'm not saying this is the exact solution, but begin thinking about how this piece, which kind of stands out on its own, this is one of those commercial pieces that doesn't make sense as commercial anymore. Begin thinking about what you could do to activate that. At 8th Street corridor, begin thinking about that being a more heavily and densely populated corridor and providing opportunities and hubs for future rail access and transit access if that mass transit use ever comes north from Indianapolis and stops in downtown Noblesville for park and ride opportunities. And then finally, and very importantly, this concept of local and regional connectivity, this concept of hub. How do we bring people to downtown Noblesville? How do we keep them here? One, how do we provide an opportunity where they can live here, shop here, play here, and work here? But if they want to just visit, how do we give them opportunities to come here, visit, and spend some money? No offense, we can have all the residents of Carmel and Fishers in the world want to come up here and spend money in downtown Noblesville. We'll take every dime they want to spend. And providing the amenities such as, the simple thing of I can't think of a single place in Noblesville, downtown Noblesville where there's a bike rack. If I wanted to ride my bike into downtown Noblesville, where do I park it? There's no organized, it's simple things like that. And much more complex things like, how do we connect the Monon Trail to Noblesville? There's a plan and a process in place and people talking about how we can make that a reality. But how do we drive that to the next step and make it so somebody from downtown Noblesville can get to the Monon and ride their bike to downtown Indianapolis? And again, thinking about Noblesville as this regional connective hub of Fishers and Hamilton County and even down into Indianapolis. Arts is a component of this. How do we make these places special where people want to spend time? Again, how do we think of ourselves? What do we think of ourselves? How do we articulate that in a plan? How do we commit ourselves to making that a reality? Midland Trace is a very important piece of that, connecting that Monon Trail to Noblesville. And then finally, the issue that it wouldn't be a downtown plan unless we talked about is parking. Whether there is or is not a parking problem in downtown Noblesville, there's a perceived parking problem, which means there is a parking problem in downtown Noblesville. I've never really had a problem finding a parking space within a couple of blocks of where I wanted to park, but I had to walk a couple of blocks to get there. How do we use parking as a way to do more than just provide parking spaces? A parking study was done several years ago, and they talked about the mega parking garage, this super 500, 600 space parking garage that would sit on a variety of properties. They studied several of them, here and some other places. Our consultant and their subconsultant out of Chicago who does downtown commercial marketing said what you really need to think about is not the mega garage. How do you make a mega garage blend into downtown Noblesville? How do you build a 600 space parking structure and make it fit into the character of downtown Noblesville? And it's hard to do. Their suggestion was use parking as an activator to redevelopment projects. Strategically locate these parking spaces and these parking garages. And again, I'm not condemning this. We've not have plans for a parking garage here nor here, but thinking about how these strategic locations can help activate new office and residential development around them. How can these parking structures be located so that foot traffic from them activates new retail opportunities in downtown Noblesville? How can we get a person from this parking garage to their office over here, and who does that benefit? I had an opportunity to visit, I won't say a small community, but a community that had a downtown like this in Canada, and they had just built a new stadium for their hockey team. They purposefully did not build a parking garage for this 10,000-seat stadium, and we asked them why. And their rationale was, if this is the stadium, we want people to park here and walk past every one of these shops on their way to go to see a hockey game. So they can eat, so they can shop, and so that this becomes an activator of additional service and retail opportunities within our community. So the plan that we pitch now is that there are multiple parking garages, and they're strategically located to do much more than just park cars, but to activate new redevelopment opportunities around them and to activate enhanced business opportunities for the businesses who are already here. This is the Key Bank lot and the lot behind going all the way to 10th Street. And you see what the artist had rendered this out as a 3-story parking structure. The main reason I wanted to show you this is because this structure has to be sensitive to the architecture of the building around it. We want these to look nice. That means they're going to be expensive. You know, anybody can slap up concrete walled structures that look terrible, look very industrial. You serve a parking need, but they aren't particularly aesthetic. And my argument to you is even if it costs us more, it's worth designing these things from an architectural perspective that makes them assets to our community rather than just service opportunities for our community. At the end of the day, it's all about results, and that means that you can live, work, play, and shop in downtown Noblesville. How do we move forward from here? Again, it's about coordinating leadership, putting the foundation in place and the structure in place to move this plan from a planning phase and a vision phase to an implementation phase. Organizing resources, both public and private, leveraging public dollars to gather private dollars, seeking a return on investment of 6 to 1. My dollar gets $6 of private outside capital that comes in the community invested into downtown Noblesville. And setting the table and opportunities through ordinances, rules, and regulations to create opportunities for success rather than reasons to fail. Partnerships, public and private, internal and external, recruiting developers to help us in this process, because quite frankly, we can't do it on our own. The government of the city of Noblesville, the organizations of the city of Noblesville can't make this plan a reality without private capital investment. That can come from existing business and property owners. It can come from outside developers seeking to do things in our community. We want to create a framework where they can be successful and make money. Because if they can make money, they'll invest dollars here. And if they invest dollars, our vision gets realized. I probably shouldn't do that, Ron. I'm pounding all over your microphone. But it's all about helping to make our vision a reality, setting the framework for successful development to occur in that. We want the development we want. We want to set the framework where they can be successful and do the things they need to do and help us achieve what we want to achieve. Public investment, private property ownership, it's about selling the plan. This whole process from this point forward is about selling this plan. Going door to door with property owners and business owners in downtown Noblesville and neighborhoods, getting their input and their buy-in to this process. I can't do it without buy-in from the property owners. We want their input in this process. We want to help them succeed. Success can be a lot of different things. Is it making money? Sure. We want to help them make money in leasing space, activating areas for square footage in their building that they can't use today, providing opportunities for enhanced development of underutilized property. It's also about creating the vision for this community that we want and driving forward, getting the things that are important to us while helping them make money in that process. And then finally, it's about the vision and the process and early success. We're going to have early successes. There will be successes from this plan this summer. You can mark my words on that. We're going to move this plan forward this summer because it's important. It's too important not to. Ultimately, it's about creating a vision and delivering the vision. If we pull this off, this isn't easy. If we pull this off, it'll have benefits for generations in this community. It'll be the most important thing we've ever done as a community. More important than the corporate campus, more important than State Road 37. Because I tell you, all the business guys that I bring in from out of the country who come into Noblesville, we eat in downtown Noblesville. Because downtown Noblesville talks about how we think of ourselves. It speaks of how important our historic heritage is, how important this heart of our community is. And if we ever expect people to bring their private capital from outside of Noblesville into Noblesville, they want to know that we're serious. A thriving, vibrant downtown Noblesville is the best thing we can do to show outside businesses that we're serious about our community. It's important to us, and we're going to do what it takes to make it happen. Christy Myers, Downtown Economic Development Director. Chris Ham, Ben Bontrager, Amy Shanklin. I haven't seen Ben walk back into the room yet. This is the part of the deal where I stop talking and I open up for questions and comments. I know it's a lot of information.